Have you ever met somebody but felt like you'd known them forever? What if the people that we meet, it's not by coincidence, but it's because of an entanglement that we made lifetimes ago? And what if all the fear and anxiety that you feel, it doesn't truly come from you, but someone that you used to be? Maybe what we call death is just forgetting. In 1980, a Yale-trained psychiatrist called Weiss was treating a patient for severe anxiety. It was just a normal day like any other in his 10-year career. But when he placed a woman called Catherine into a state of deep hypnosis, the words that came out of her mouth would change his life forever.
I was very disciplined, very scientific. My mind was very left brain, and I was not open at all to New Age concepts or concepts of past lives.
Catherine came to Dr. Weiss with a fear of water, but not like a rational fear or a normal fear. She suffered from severe aquaphobia. She had panic attacks, recurring nightmares about the ocean. It was a deep and unexplainable terror.
She was suffering from panic attacks, phobias, fears, nightmares. She had begun sleeping in a large closet in her apartment because of fear.
With little to no progress after years of conventional therapies and medication, Dr. Weiss was stumped. So, he turned to hypnosis.
She turned out to be one of those approximately 20% of people who could go very deeply even the first time.
Now, he wasn't just throwing like a Hail Mary. He had used the technique before with other patients. Because psychiatrists sometimes, they use hypnotherapy to uncover like repressed memories, like childhood memories. But what happened next, it was something that he'd never seen before or he expected to see.
1758. I just see a child, a boy. His clothes are raggedy. He's cold.
What becomes of the boy?
I don't know. He will probably die.
How many times have you been through lifetimes on the earth?
86.
86.
Yes,
Do you remember them all?
I will. When it is important for me to remember them.
Catherine began talking about things that simply she just couldn't have experienced. Well, she couldn't have experienced in this current life. As Catherine relaxed, her breathing slowed and her voice softened, and she began to speak, but not as herself. Dr. Weiss was the head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical Center. He was a man of science, a man of academia, and he definitely did not believe in reincarnation. So, obviously, Weiss just assumed that it was her imagination or it was a metaphor. But when she awoke, something had changed. Her fear of water was completely gone.
But a common question I'm sure you're asked all the time is, how do you tell the difference between if you're really remembering a past life and you're just imagining something? How do people tell the difference, or does it matter?
Well, at one level, it doesn't matter if they get rid of symptoms, and that happens all the time, people getting rid of fears, phobias, and other symptoms. For example, if you remember drowning in ancient Egypt, you won't be able to prove whether that's memory or fantasy or metaphor. But if your fear of water, your fear of gagging or choking disappears in this life, then you've had a profound clinical benefit, whether the memory was real or metaphor or fantasy.
And Dr. Weiss was so intrigued, so he brings her back in and he puts her under hypnosis again. And this time she described another lifetime. She described being a servant in like a really hard, grueling life. and then a sudden illness that killed her. In another session, she spoke about ancient Egypt, about temples, rituals, along with names that no one had ever mentioned. And after each session, the same result. Her symptoms faded. Her nightmares all stopped, and she'd felt like the anxiety had lifted. But then came the session that changed everything. When in a deep trance, Catherine went back further and further, so far that it was almost before birth. She said she was in between lives, in a place of light, surrounded by what she called masters. She said that they had messages, but the messages weren't for her. They were for Dr. Weiss.
This was a very tough change for me. I was very left-brained and skeptical and academic. So when Catherine, the very first patient who had these experiences, was having these past life memories and her symptoms were clearing up, I still had great difficulty accepting it. It was hard for me because this was not in my background. And about the fifth or sixth time she died, she floated above her body, finding this light, and told me there were two people there to see me, my father and my son, both of whom had died. I had a son who died at 23 days old. My father had died 2 years before Catherine was seeing me of a heart attack in New Jersey. She knew none of this. I don't even have diplomas in my office. She knew very little about me, and she started telling me private little details, secrets about the lives and deaths and medical conditions even of my father and my son. This was shocking to me because I knew intuitively and intellectually that she couldn't know this information. Nobody knew this information, only my wife and I, and she'd never met my wife. Whatever happens, the world shifts and it's never the same again. And so this happened to me, and she said, was telling me all these details, and I asked her, where are you getting this information from? And she said, from people that were around her but not in bodies. She called them master spirits.
When he published his book, Many Lives, Many Masters, the reaction was nothing less than explosive. Here you have a well-respected, distinguished academic teacher talking about the soul and reincarnation. Some did call it revolutionary. Some called it delusional. But around the world, other researchers had already begun documenting cases that echoed Catherine's. One of the earliest in modern times was a girl named Shanti Devi. In 1930s India, at just 3 years old, she began talking about another family and a different home in a distant town called Mathura. She insisted that her real name was Lugdi Devi, even described the husband that she used to have. She told her parents about the colour of his house, the shape of his courtyard, and even where she'd hidden money before dying in childbirth.
There were a lot of people very curious to know whether Shanti had been talking all nonsense or is there truth in it. But when in the morning, Kedarnath very openly and clearly stated that I am 100% convinced she is Lugdi. The whole thing spread like fire, and hundreds and hundreds of people used to come to see this child.
Obviously, again, her parents just dismissed it all. But they dismissed it as long as they could, until the details became way too specific. And when the newspapers reported on the story, Mahatma Gandhi himself arranged a formal investigation. A committee travelled with Shanti, or Lugdi, to Mathura, and would you believe it, she recognised streets that she'd never ever seen before. She even went on and identified the man that she claimed to be her husband. 24 of her statements were later verified against official records and family testimony. Years later, the psychiatrist Dr. Ian Stevenson would review and document the case very carefully. He did it without hypnosis, without leading questions, only observation. Now, it didn't prove reincarnation, but it was an odd piece to a puzzle that just refuses to disappear.
Individually, the cases of these little children seemed weak, but when you looked at them as a whole, they showed me certain uniformities. Very young age of the children, 2 to 5, and then the tendency for the children to forget when they were 7 or 8.
James was born April 10th, 1998. That happened to be a Good Friday. He didn't have any health issues. He wasn't a big crier. He wasn't fussy. He was happy. But it was different when he started having the nightmares. It was about 2 weeks after his 2nd birthday. Cooked dinner, gave him his bath, took him to bed, and that was that until about 3 in the morning, and then I just heard screaming. This was blood-curdling screaming, like someone was killing him. He was saying, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out." And that's what he was repeating over and over. "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out."
So I started to ask him some questions. What happened to your plane? It got shot. Well, who shot your plane? The Japanese. Well, how do you know it was the Japanese? And I think he said that night, the big red sun. Where could that come from? How could he articulate something that specific? So I kept going. I said, well, where did your plane come from? And he said, a boat. Did your boat have a name? And he said, yes, Natoma.
The USS Natoma Bay was a real aircraft carrier, and there was one pilot named James who died aboard it. His parents never thought that he could be talking about something real. But the details again, they just became too specific to be made up. He gave names that he couldn't know. He talked about a ship called the Natoma and a pilot named James. So after months of the same story, they finally had enough, and his parents started searching through military records. And they found what they were looking for.
I found a list of men that had been killed serving on World War II aircraft carriers. I went through the list and found the names of 18 men that had been killed aboard Natoma Bay. It was really startling and almost scary. There was one guy killed during the Battle of Iwo Jima, and his name is James M. Houston, Jr.
James M. Houston Jr. was shot down in 1945, with his plane bursting into flames. It was exactly as the child had described. Years later, Dr. Jim Tucker from the University of Virginia reviewed the case. He confirmed that many of the child's statements actually had been recorded before the family uncovered the historical records.
Then when James got old enough to draw, he drew, according to his parents, dozens, if not hundreds of pictures of airplanes and battle scenes, and he would always sign them James 3. Now, I thought that might be because he was 3 years old, but his parents said, no, they asked him, and he said, I'm the 3rd James, I'm James 3. And in fact, he continued to sign them that way even after he turned 4. So this means if James Leininger was in fact remembering a past life, it had to be Houston's life because he was the only pilot from the Natoma Bay killed at Iwo Jima. So what we can do is compare what James said with Houston's life. Now, his parents say that he also talked about family life before the war, but we don't have any documentation of those statements that was made before Houston was identified. But what I can do is list all the items where we have definite documentation that was made before anyone knew anything about James Houston. Much of it comes from an interview that the Leiningers did with ABC News, again, before anyone knew if James's statements actually matched an actual pilot. So James signed his drawings James 3. Houston was James Jr., which would make James Leininger the 3rd James. James said that he flew off the Natoma. Houston was a pilot on the USS Natoma Bay. James said he flew a Corsair. Houston had flown a Corsair. He was actually flying a different plane when he was killed, but he was part of the squadron that had tested the Corsair for the Navy. James said he was shot down by the Japanese, and Houston was shot down by the Japanese. James said he died at Iwo Jima. Houston was the one Natoma Bay pilot killed during the Iwo Jima operation. James said one day, quote, "My airplane got shot into the engine and crashed in the water, and that's how I died." Eyewitnesses reported that Houston's plane was, quote, hit head-on right on the middle of the engine. James had nightmares of a plane crashing and sinking in the water. Houston's plane crashed in the water and quickly sank. And James said that Jack Larson was there, and Jack Larson was the pilot of the plane next to Houston's on the day that he was killed.
So the explanation for skeptics is obviously just coincidence and suggestion. But for investigators, the parallels were difficult to ignore. So we have a case in India and a case in America by two children, half a century apart, who were describing lives that ended before theirs began. These cases are a drop in the ocean of the thousands reported. Even if just one detail were genuine, what would that mean? What would that mean for the mind or the soul? I think for believers, these stories suggest that consciousness survives after death. Skeptics believe that they are just products of memory, imagination, and just coincidence. Science asks for proof, something measurable and repeatable. And unfortunately, this is where the idea of past lives does begin to get blurry. Dr. Ian Stevenson spent 40 years collecting over 2,000 different cases, and he called it evidence, not certainty. His successor, Dr. Jim Tucker, continues that work today. But even he admits, the deeper that you look, the stranger it gets.
We've studied over 2,000 cases of young children who say they remember a past life. If you look at the cases, there is a consciousness realm that interacts with the physical reality, but is also apart from it. There are times when the consciousness comes back to this same reality in a young child. And if you get data that conflicts with what you think you know of how the world works, well, then you have to question what you think. I have become quite convinced that there's more than just the physical world, that there is this element or realm of consciousness, first of all, and that we all have a piece of it.
Psychologists argue that the mind can invent remarkably detailed narratives, and that cultures that expect reincarnation report more cases.
Well, my conclusion so far is that for the strongest cases, reincarnation is the best, but not the only explanation. We don't have any perfect case. They all have some flaw. And so I've never claimed we have anything like a proof of reincarnation. But I do believe that reincarnation should be taken seriously as a possible explanation.
That day in Dr. Brian Weiss's office, whatever the origin of Catherine's memories, the healing was real. The woman who had walked in, crippled by fear, left with the symptoms gone. Not after years of medication, but after reliving lives in her mind that may or may not have existed. Science offers one explanation, and spirituality offers another. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle. When I was 3, I told my mum that my real parents had died in a car crash, but they were happy that they were looking after me. Did that happen in a past life, or was I just a kid making up a story? Maybe reincarnation isn't just about proof, but it's about the possibility that who we are continues, and the that we're part of something larger than just one lifetime. I have to say that the books and the interviews are very convincing, but what do you think? Do you believe that we're still part of the party after leaving? Or are these stories just something that our mind creates to soften the edges?